I thought it would be very nice to have Samuel here, having had a couple of discussions with him over the last 2 weeks, and also having read some of his books. I don't know if any of you have read any of his other books or had an opportunity to do so, but I can certainly recommend them for a very refreshing and insightful view into all things high dimensional. So look, again, thanks for coming, Samuel. And I just wanted to do a quick check. Is anyone online here actually from or participated in the Clairvision School?
Look, I couldn't tell you this at the moment. I don't know where. I've just had a flurry of technical problems in the last hour. You've got to see, I'm in the middle of the Catskill Mountains. It's not an urban area. And when we are soaked with rain like this, often we have internet problems. So it's very fortunate that we managed to connect. It's not been simple in the last hour to get everything to work.
Okay, that's understandable and happens, and we'll just bear with it. However things go, I'm sure they'll be fine. I was just wondering though if there's anyone else from around the world. I know you've got a few people here in Australia who have been part of the Clairvision School here. Is there anyone from the Australian group here?
Yes, but I don't know how to talk.
Okay. Oh, that worked fine.
That worked fine. Oh, I see.
I
Sorry.
recognize those voices.
All right. Well, it'll be good to touch base with Rick and Rick. Was it Rick Vader throughout the conference? It'd be nice. I thought it'd be good to get some feedback from people who have worked through some of these teachings and techniques. So what I'll do, Samuel, I'd love to just hand it over to you to start with. And if you could give everyone a bit of an introduction about yourself and your background, and a little bit about your ethos and what you're doing at the moment.
Okay, so my name is Samuel. I was born in France in 1957, and I was interested in meditation since I was a kid. So I decided I'd give myself some sort of solid background to pursue some studies in the field of consciousness. I decided to study medicine. I studied meditation quite early, but I went to study medicine. My first idea was that I could learn things by being a psychiatrist or doing things like neurosurgery. So I started doing neurosurgery, studying neurosurgery, and it quickly appeared that opening people's skulls was not going to teach me anything about consciousness. But because I had studied those studies, I ended up finishing them. I studied Sanskrit at the same time. I did a thesis of history of medicine on the topic of subtle bodies, chakras in the Indian tradition, which was an interesting way of challenging the French medical establishment, which is not that much into alternative theories, but I presented it in a fairly academic way. I made it a thesis of history of medicine, and because it was done well academically, they passed it. It was actually quite funny. Are you hearing me?
Yep, hear loud and clear.
Loud and clear. Okay. Yeah. It was very funny.
Very clear. It's good.
The people who, in France, you have to support your thesis, and the people who were passing before me were very, very heavily criticized. How dare you say that this enzyme does this or that? So I thought when it was going to come to me, they were going to shred me to pieces, literally. But it turned out that because no one had ever heard about those Sanskrit texts, they didn't feel like saying anything much. So it was like I had this board of professors in front of me, 12 of them, and it was like talking to a bunch of kids who read their first Lobsang Rempa novel, They were asking me things like, so how many reincarnations do they say you can have? And did you really meet this Indian teacher? I was really, you have to do these thesis presentations in front of a big audience. And everyone was laughing their head off. And so they ended up giving me the title of Faculty Prize winner for that. and electing me to the French Society of History of Medicine, which was quite funny because 30 minutes before I thought they were going to burn me alive. And at the end of that, I ended up with a medal and a distinction. There was a great sense of irony in terms of destiny. So when I finished my medical studies, I practiced medicine for a period. I had studied acupuncture and homeopathy. In France, in particular, it tends to be GPs, medical doctors, who do homeopathy and acupuncture. I practiced alternative therapies for a period, and then I stopped everything and I just did meditation for a period of about 5 years. I mean, stopped all activities and just meditated. I'd done some meditation before. I started doing meditation when I was in my teens, but it was only around that time that I took it up as a full-time job for a period. And when you meditate non-stop like this, well, things happen after a while. That's what it's designed to achieve. And at the end of this period, I went to Australia in 1987, and I created the Clairvision School, the purpose of which is to offer some in-depth training to people who have an interest in meditation and in spiritual experiences at large.
Okay, so can you give us a bit of an insight of we spoke briefly about this last time we talked. When you say full-time meditation, can you define for everyone what you mean by full-time meditation and how that came about?
Well, first I spent a number of years being trained in meditation with different teachers. I studied with Taoist teachers, and for the purpose of my thesis, I met a number of people in India who were in the field of Kundalini yoga, Kriya yoga, and different techniques of meditation. And normally you meditate 1 hour a day or sometimes 2 hours a day. And then after having done that for several years, I just stopped all activities and I just started meditating in the morning, like 7 or 8 in the morning, and stopped for lunch and started again in the afternoon and stopped for dinner and did some more in the evening, and kept on like this for month and month in places where I was usually alone, so I was not pulled out by distractions. It's about as full-time as it gets, really. There's no Sunday break or whatever it's.
Yeah, and so that went on for 5 years.
I mean, from time to time I had to change place or go to another country or do things like that. I sometimes was meditating in the Himalayas. Some of my meditation took place in western parts of India, other parts in France, in Corsica, in beautiful Provence, which is in the south of France, different places. Very difficult to find a good place to meditate. It was always extremely difficult to find a place where there was the kind of environment that was receptive for meditation. That was one of the reasons why I created the Clairvision School afterwards.
Right, okay, so how did you manage to, say, support yourself in that time? Did you have friends, family that were helping you out, or some way that enabled you to do this? What was the situation around you at the time?
The baseline was that I stretched finances. I mean, I had the kind of profession that allowed me to, from time to time, if I needed, to just go and work 2-3 weeks to get cashed up, doing some lockers or something like this. But basically, the recipe was to spend as little as possible. If you want to be an ascetic, you have to learn to get your finances to last.
Yes, absolutely. Being able to go the stretches. So how did you find in this process? How did you find your consciousness starting to unfold? Can you share any kind of process that you identified or experienced?
Well, in the beginning, it starts like a bit like an expansion of of normal consciousness, you know, the kind of things people experience when they meditate a few hours, meaning there is the sense of normal reference. It's like you're contemplating light, or you're feeling this, or you're feeling that. Sometimes it's hell, huh? Meditation is not always bliss. At times there's some rushes of thoughts or big emotions, big waves that pass through, and you're like this little boat being rocked by the elements. And then when you keep doing this, there is a phase for which I've tended to use the term the deep waters of consciousness, which is that, you know, it shifts from a reference where it's you looking at things to the reference where there's just no one. The usual standpoint of experience is eroded, and there's just this huge vastness that's there, and there's not even you looking at it, it's just looking at itself, and then it moves, and then it takes you into all sorts of extraordinary levels you'd never imagine would exist, and worlds. And you know, that was one of the things that surprised me when I was meditating. Before that, I tended to have a very fast life. I was studying in France and things were moving extremely fast, and I thought by the time I started meditating, there'd be a big slowdown, and I could just, you know, relax, so to speak. And it's not like that. Meditation, you know, if you go to my website, the first thing you'll see on top of the front page is raising the voltage of consciousness. Whoop, getting noise there. You still hearing me?
Yeah, raising the voltage there, Samuel. Cut that out, come on.
Exactly. And so what happens with meditation is that, you know, when you do that full time for a few months, and you understand that some people do that, like for example in the Tibetan tradition, the standard method of training lamas is to get them to do retreats that are 3 years, 3 months, and 3 days, and many of them do more than once, so it exists. When you do that for a period, there's really, after a few weeks or a few months, there's really an exponential acceleration of experiences where it's a completely different ball game. It's just got nothing to do with what it was in the beginning. In the beginning, you know, it's like you're in your normal box and you get in touch with beautiful lights or all sorts of divine presences, all the love that flows, and at times all the tensions and all the anxiety and all the fears that come up. But still, it's you looking at those things. And past the point of acceleration, well, there's just no one left. It means the usual frame of reference has faded, and behind this comes a vastness that's of a completely different magnitude. You know, there are not really words in English or in French for that matter to express those states, because whenever we talk about those experiences we feel inside the box, you know, but there is life outside the box. Sometimes this fades, and what's behind it is absolutely gigantic by comparison.
Oh, look, absolutely. I think I relate this in one of my audio blogs. The very first time I meditated, I had an experience that was so profound. And well, I say the very first time anyway, the first time in this life anyway. But it was so profound. And I certainly spent the next year or so trying to reconnect with that feeling and re-experience that. It was almost like a bit of a teaser of what would be to come. And I've found myself quite a bit disappointed, you know, still working through those issues of attachment, but certainly never had that sort of level of experience again in any short term afterwards. But I was just wondering whether people can respond in the text chat there by clicking on the chat button. But just from your own perspectives, have you ever had the sort of experience that Samuel's talking about? And or whether it was a
point I want to
one-off, or
make is
whether
that
it came from
there's
prolonged
yeah
meditation.
the
Sorry,
point I
go
want
on,
to make is
Samuel.
that there's really a big gap, a big difference between the kind of experiences you have, when you do it occasionally or 1 or 2 hours a day, and the kind of experiences that come up when you've been doing that for 6 months non-stop. You see, it gets into a very different ball game, totally different line of experiences.
Do you think, though, that there is the occasion? Did you ever experience in the early days of doing your work something that really was so large, or such a shift in your consciousness temporarily that it sort of gave you an indication that, hey, you were on the right track, and then it was like a big peak in the voltage spike, you could say.
Look, that's the point I was trying to make earlier. If I started meditating when I was a kid, and if I kept all those years, it's because there were bright times and big experiences at times. But the point I was trying to make earlier is that precisely no matter how big those things appear, there are some much larger states behind that, states of a magnitude that the human structure can hardly comprehend. When you get there, it's like your body could fall apart. And so there's like an exponential increase in experiences. And so we certainly all have beautiful experiences on the way in the beginning that gives us the sense of big realities behind. Maybe it can be interesting to know that there are some larger state behind that too.
Yeah, no, understand what you're saying. So it's really like
to answer you precisely, the experience that I had during all those years were just not at all of the same magnitude. There was nothing that could have let me suspect that it could get so broad.
So profound, huh? Because I know from your work, from reading your books, you've certainly drawn on obviously a body of knowledge that has certainly come from a very different perspective to some people, which I found quite refreshing. I love to find authors who are writing about particular topics that, while it may be in parallel to some of our more common ideas of spirituality and so forth, you tend to tap into a deeper comprehension of it. Well, that's what I found anyway.
The work I'm doing is essentially about direct experience. It's about trying to give people a direct experience of spiritual realms, not just some sort of intellectual understanding or ideas about it, but just concrete, tangible experience. It's always subjective to a certain extent, but you can try to bring as much objectivity into it as possible. And as part of doing this, the Clairvision School is not just run by one person. It's more like a fellowship around spreading over a number of countries. And one of our main direction is to map consciousness, means to explore consciousness in a way that's not just particular to one person or even one group, but in a way where we can just take any group of people and take them through processes that we've defined and get them to certain states of consciousness or explore some aspects of themselves. And so we've tried to do that. We need a model. You need a model behind this. And we've tried to put together a model that links to as many sources as possible. So we don't have some sort of ivory tower that's just our own little vocabulary, but that people who follow the Clairvision work be comfortable reading books of authors like Rudolf Steiner or some Indian text. The idea is to create bridges as much as possible between different systems.
Oh, exactly, and to put these techniques, ideas, and things you're talking about into context, I guess, and to surround them with as much body of supporting context as possible to help communicate those ideas. I think one of the biggest challenges in this field is to communicate the ideas. It's very different when you receive it in direct revelation compared to trying to put it forward in and clothe it in words to communicate it to someone else. But look, Yaraman had a question there. She was asking, how do we reach that beyond if we're unable to meditate full time? Do you, through the Clairvision School, have you provided any tools and techniques to help people accelerate that process to that point?
Look, I think, spirituality is a big fountain that everyone should drink from. There is no no reason to not do it. I mean, that's what the Buddhists say about the Dharma. It's good in the beginning, it's good in the middle, it's good in the end. At the same time, the direction of the Clairvision School is to try to cater a bit for people who've got a more professional approach, just as some people maybe want to be doing spirituality a bit on the hobby mode or whatever, and do a bit of it. It's important, and there's not really a need for more places like that or more teachings like that. There's plenty of them. The specificity of the Clairvision School, if there is one, is that it's really been designed for people who want to go beyond doing a bit of, or and maybe
to apply
time at the moment in your life to do this, but really the idea is to offer training to a high level. That's one of the things I observed when I was doing my practices, was that altogether there are many school teachings, places, ashrams, which are very happy to give a little bit of knowledge to a lot of people, but there's not that many places you can turn to really address the depth of consciousness, to really go beyond the superficial, the trivial, beyond what's a bit everywhere. Everyone, you've got lots of teachings where people talk about the same thing. So how do you break through this? How do you go beyond? And if there is something specific about the Clairvision School, well, it sort of caters for people who've got this, who are attracted to more than just the superficial levels.
Yeah, and I guess it is, as you were saying before, about utilizing the existing teachings and finding ways and methods to actually apply them in people's lives, making it a part of your life. And maybe to answer your question, Yaraman, I mean, I take the approach that to try to make every day a meditation. I don't know if you could comment on that, Samuel, but to live in an open, present state, be aware of what imagery and what is manifesting around you that you can learn from and receive guidance from. And I think that comes through in the physical, in the outside world, as a reflection of the inside world, just as much as if you were sitting there on a mountain peak with your with your eyes closed and in deep trance. But certainly it's an old and proven technique of going into retreat. But how do you think that corresponds one to another, Samuel, from the waking state concept of meditation to the deep state?
No, they really don't correspond at all. They really lead to different spaces, different things. But they've all got their value. And in the teachings we've got in the Clairvision work, we use a lot of techniques that can be applied into daily reality. The motto is vision in this work, direct perception, not so much as in psychic clairvoyance, but more as in a deep vision of yourself. And we've got a whole arsenal of techniques you can practice in your bathtub, or when you're driving, or when you're talking to people. That can take you a long way in terms of bringing some light in your daily activities, bringing a different consciousness and a different awareness. But at the same time, I would not say they correspond. It's just not the same. It's not the same magnitude. It's not the same order. It's a whole. Yeah. There's a different. That's in a way that's exciting. We live on a level and we make plenty of realizations there, and we see plenty of things. It's also exciting to know that there are other levels too, and we don't want to reduce everything. Even if we can't, it's not because we can't just go there right now that we should reduce it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So you could say they are two different techniques that both complement each other, as any regular spiritual practice will complement one to the other in the same state, but they they lead to different states of consciousness.
Well, you could also say you need a lot of preparation before you go deep in consciousness, and those preparations have to do with daily work and practices you do in a normal life, where you bring a different awareness and a whole preparation and a whole. And there's a whole behind the appearance of the ordinary world. There is all sorts of extraordinary things out there that are just waiting for you to tune into and to observe.
Yeah. Okay. No, look, that's that sounds good to me. Sounds resonates well. I've got a question here from Shelley, just in regards to your thoughts on how medications such as antidepressants can block the third eye, which might be a good segue into having a bit of a talk about your free online book and what your view of how the third eye operates and how we can all tap into its potential.
Well, the problem with medication is that at the moment they are being given to people in quantities that are unprecedented. You know, in the last year they discovered that in London there were traces of Prozac in drinking water. Whenever you drink a glass of water in London, it's already gone through 7 people. And it's at the point where there's so many people taking antidepressants that there are traces of Prozac in drinking water.
Yeah.
I think this speaks volumes. Look, there is no doubt that in some cases medication may be needed, but really we live in a world where it's being given too much. And essentially what it does is that it disconnects the person that's down here from their higher self. So by that, it sort of bypasses a whole lot of anxiety and problems, but it doesn't really resolve them. And I think it's particularly worrying when you see all those children who are being given medication that's akin to antidepressant, things like Ritalin and all this. It's just not very good for the development of their subtle bodies.
And from your work with the book you've put out about awakening your third eye, do you think you could give a bit of an overview of that process, just for people who haven't read through the book or had a look at it yet, and it may spark their interest to go into it in a bit more detail?
Well, you know, the third eye is like a general pathway to go inside. In the Indian tradition, they take this example of a city with 10 gates. 9 gates lead outside, 1 gate leads inside to the inner world. So the 9 gates are the senses, you know, the eyes, the ears, the mouth, etc. comes to 9. And then the 10th gate is the third eye, which doesn't lead to the external world, but which leads to realms of consciousness. And so working on the third eye is like a systematic method to go inside, basically, not to just have some sort of, not just to let intuition follow its course, but to take it a little bit more systematically and work on at the same time on the hardware of consciousness. You know, you could describe subtle bodies as the hardware of consciousness, meaning that they're structures which facilitate certain states of consciousness, and the third eye would be one of those structures. And so when you build the hardware, you facilitate experiences. You still want to have devotion and meditation and all the practices that you would normally do, and you still want to rely on grace and on higher light, but at the same time you make it easier for spiritual presences to reach you. You know, the saying, the gods help those who help themselves. By building subtle bodies, you make it easier for spiritual presences to reach you. It's like there's something that they can land on.
I would, if Rick Vader, have you got anything to comment on that? Have you been through this process or done some of this training that you could perhaps share an experience or two? You might be wondering how to talk if you push the hotkey button to talk that you pushed before. Okay, looks like Rick seems to have some some trouble getting out. We'll come back to Rick if he's available a bit later. So, Samuel, from that process, then it's a unique technique and tool that you've developed based upon existing principles. Is that correct?
Oh, I would not call it unique at all. You see, in several traditions, you have this concept that's called inner alchemy, where you don't just meditate as in letting consciousness become very silent or tuning into light or tuning into spiritual presences, but you also go through a patient building of energy centers. And the general term for this is inner alchemy. In the Clairvision work, we've coined the term subtle body building. And so it certainly doesn't mean that you don't pay attention to concepts, such as devotion or surrender to the divine, but it means that you add this extra dimension of developing energy centers, and that it in itself is going to create a foundation for consciousness to rest on. And through patient and systematic cultivation, which by the way can very well be achieved in the world this one, you don't have to be in a cave for that. You can do that while you're driving, you can do that when you're talking to people, you can use sexuality to build subtle bodies. When you do this, you have a supplement to the effort that you do on the level of consciousness. And so in all traditions, you see, you have you could divide meditation techniques into two broad categories. You've got those that work on the mind through the mind. Just let the mind become very quiet and silent. If some of your listeners have done, for example, a technique like Vipassana, that would be typically a technique that works just by letting consciousness refine itself. And you have other forms of techniques for which we use the term inner alchemy, and where they're the techniques that work on things like chakras or Kundalini, techniques like Kriya Yoga, or techniques of Taoist alchemy and so on, which develop subtle bodies at the same time as an opening of consciousness take place. So it's like the two go together.
Yeah, look, this is, as I said, as you can see, Samuel's got a very different take on things, but it's certainly, you can see in the common vein running through how this all ties together with many of the traditional teachings. So I wanted to ask Ace of Cups, you asked a question there about how the Clairvision School touches upon the experiences that are taught in the esoteric mystery schools. Do you want to just elaborate on that a little bit, Ace of Cups, and ask that question?
I think you read it very well. I wanted to see what Samuel thought.
I am very sorry, I'm not hearing Ace of Cups.
Okay, he just wanted to know what the Clairvision School, how it touches upon the experiences that are taught in the esoteric mystery schools. Would you say that's
well, I think we could call the Clairvision School a mystery school. Mystery school. I mean, I don't know what exactly. It's probably one of those broad terms that, for which people have different meanings. But the way I understand a mystery school is one that's there to put people in touch with their mystery and the depths of what's inside, and to to just see what's beyond. Many people live in the material world and see only the material world, and people like your listeners are interested in tuning into something that's broader and greater. And so a mystery school is a place where people should be able to go and get in touch with those mysteries, and different mystery schools are going to have different styles of work and different approaches. We're definitely gearing our courses in that direction at the Clairvision School.
Okay, and Yaraman, did you want to ask your question in regards to the spiritual bodies?
I mean, the only thing is, if Ace of Cups, well, I'm not sure if Ace of Cups had in mind the Greek mystery schools, because the term mystery is often comes back from the Eleusinian mystery or the Orphic mystery. So I don't know if that's what he had in mind, but on a broader level, that would be my answer.
Okay, you mentioned Rudolf Steiner and things like the secret doctrine and teachings such as that and experiences.
I have immense respect for Rudolf Steiner. I regard him as a fabulous source of esoteric knowledge, and in the courses and in the books I've written, and in the courses we're teaching at the Clairvision School, which I'm certainly not the only person who teaches courses in this school. We have instructors a bit all over the world at the moment. But we really try to build bridges so that the people who come to our courses feel at home when they read Rudolf Steiner, and vice versa. Often people who've felt at home in the readings of the books of Rudolf Steiner find that the model we've created is tailored with them in mind.
Thanks for that, Samuel. I've got another question here, just in regards to the bodies that you're speaking of, developing these bodies. Do you refer to them as the same as uniting all the spiritual bodies?
Well, there are many terminologies, so I think we don't have enough time to start fighting on terminology, and anyway, it doesn't matter.
No, that's
in many cases, people use different terms, to refer to different bodies. One of the courses I've produced is the Clairvision School offers some courses like workshops and things like this. It offers also courses which are a bit like correspondence courses, which are called the knowledge tracks. And the knowledge tracks are made of CDs and lectures that you can follow in your own home without having to go to lectures or anything. One of the knowledge tracks I've created is called the Fawful Model, and that has to do with the systematic exploration of subtle bodies. When I was a medical doctor, I trained in astrophysical medicine for a period, and one of the things that struck me is that as much as there was immense depth in the medical vision of Steiner, it was not always simple for people trying to practice astrophysical medicine to figure out exactly what those subtle bodies were. So one of the courses, one of the knowledge tracks we're offering is all about trying to put that in a very simple language and in a way that builds bridges with other systems. So spiritual bodies is typically the kind of term that mean different thing to different body. I think probably I use the term subtle bodies, which means just those bodies which are not the physical body. And really it's like looking at the non-physical hardware of consciousness. What's really a direction in my work is to try to take things out of vagueness, meaning not just have some general and very broad theories, but things that people can practice and tune into. And so when I talk about things like the etheric body or the astral body, I have very specific processes for people to tune into them and to get to awaken them and develop them.
Yeah, look, this is something I'd love to lead into and discuss in a bit more detail, just following on from this. But just for Jason and Cortland, I'll come to those questions shortly, because while we're on this topic, I think it'd be nice to, if Samuel, if you could give everyone an overview of the four bodies that you're talking about, and then maybe we can go into a little bit about the other area of your work in regards to the ISIS process and the idea of interdimensional or ultra-dimensional entities, however you want to look at them. Again, terminology. But just give us let's start with an overview of the four bodies.
An overview of several bodies, but certainly. You see, and so I just want to tell everyone, I'm sure you've all read lots of books and you've come across lots of terms. So I'm asking you to be patient. We've all got the same subtle bodies. Not all books call them with the same names. So we've got to find ways to have bridges. And in 5 minutes, it's not going to be possible to tell all the names that are given to a layer. But basically, it's traditional, for example, in India, not just in anthroposophy, to separate the physical body from a layer of life force, which is what they call the prana in India, or the chi in Chinese medicine. And so that's what's called the etheric body in writers such as Rudolf Steiner and Max Heindel. So I know etheric is a terribly old-fashioned word. If I was to bring a model of subtle bodies now, I'd never use etheric. It smacks of 19th century physics and things like that. But because there is such a big body of literature that talks about the etheric body, in our model at the Clairvision School, we've kept the term etheric body for the layer of life force and prana. So you're always trying to use terms that as many people are going to be able to relate to, so that we don't isolate ourselves. Now, after that, you've got the astral body, which is level of emotions and consciousness. So when people talk about something like an emotional body, that's part of the astral body. When they talk about a mental body, that's also part of the astral body. They're like different layers of function. And on top of this, you have a layer that's more spiritual, and that's like the immortal flame in a human being. And so there's a big problem of vocabulary. Steiner used the term ego, capital E. And then, of course, all Tibetan and Hindu masters used the word ego in a very different term. They use it as a principle of ignorance. So everyone should know that ego can mean two completely different things. In some cases, it's the flame, the principle of inner light, immortality, the part of you that reincarnates from life to life, the part that can one with the divine. And to other people, the literal ego means the neurotic side of the mental, emotional, astral body. So in the model I'm using, there'd be the key terms: the physical, the etheric, which is prana and chi, the astral, which is mind and emotions, and the higher ego, capital E. It's nothing like the little ego, but that's the immortal flame. And summarized like this, it's very short, but it's not at all something abstract. In the Clairvision teachings, you'd have techniques to apply it not just to personal development, but also into techniques of healings. The Clairvision School has existed for 21 years now and has evolved its own style of therapy that's called the inner space techniques. And as part of the inner space techniques, there are a number of healing techniques which work directly on subtle bodies, like treating some physical ailments or mental disorders or emotional disorders or blockages by working on subtle bodies. It's not at all something abstract. There's lots of methods to work on specific functions in each of those bodies so as to achieve direct results that can be observed in clients.
And that that there leads into, I guess, the working with and healing the spiritual bodies, the subtle bodies. Then you go into, say, the things with spiritual attachment and entities and discordant energies and how they work and affect the subtle bodies. Is that correct?
Entities, that's usually a topic that everyone likes to talk about. When I first arrived in Australia, I was teaching in colleges of natural therapies. I was doing fairly long courses that went on for a number of months. And when you do long courses, there's always a time where people get a bit, sleepy and lose attention. And I had noticed that when this happened, there were 3 topics that would immediately wake up everyone, and they'd start making notes. 3 topics were death, sex, and entities. When they were asleep, I just had to drop one casual remark on any of those 3 topics, and everyone would wake up and start making notes. Oh, this course is really interesting, So entities is one of the topics that often catches people's attention. So probably you want me to say what an entity is at this stage.
Yeah, let's. Sorry, I'm just having a silent chuckle to myself here. Yes, by all means. Let's
So,
lead into
all right.
that.
So an entity is like a parasite, but a non-physical parasite, you know? It's a concept that's found in just about every ancient tradition, which is that just as we can have physical parasites in our guts or whatever, we can also have bits of energy that get attached to our energy, and they're not physical. Like, you know, it's very big in India. You know, I'm sure you've heard about Ayurveda, which is the traditional Indian medicine, you know, the Hindu equivalent of acupuncture and Chinese medicine. Well, Ayurveda is divided into 8 branches. One of them is general medicine, another one is gynecology and obstetrics. And one of the 8 is Bhuta-vidya, means the science of entity. Means to them, they put the problems of entities on the same level as psychiatry or as gynecology. So it's a topic on which you're going to find it difficult to find people who can have some sort of rational and cool-headed discussion. One of the reasons is that there's been a few movies out there, such as The Exorcist and things like that, which have made sensational
Demonized?
horror
To use that
stories, you
term?
know, which are totally out of this world, and which may exist but are certainly not frequent, because I've been an entity hunter for more than 20 years and I've never seen anything like that, I can tell you. And I've got people calling I have a network of practitioners I've formed all over the world, and they're being called for entities all over the world, and I can tell you we've never really heard about anything like this. It's very theatrical. However, you do have a number of clients and patients which have a variety of health problems who go from practitioner to practitioner and nothing works. And nothing works because the cause is not physical, it's not emotional, it's not a mental block, it's an energetic parasite. It's that stuff that's coming at one stage when it shouldn't have, and that's taking its side. It's like a bit of foreign energy and consciousness, like a bit of foreign subtle bodies that has its own consciousness, its own wantings, and that blocks your system, and that creates symptoms, all sorts of symptoms, like food cravings, sugar cravings, very clear. Now, see, along the years, we've collected something that I've called the entity syndrome, which I've presented. One of my books is called Entities, Parasites of the Body of Energy. And I've presented this syndrome in the book. And so the first thing to understand is that, of course, it's not enough to have one of those symptoms to think that you've got an entity. But typically, one of the symptoms that come with having an entity is the sense of something added in your energy, something foreign. People don't see it in the beginning. You have to take them through a certain process till they observe it. And they realize that this entity is bringing some parasitic thoughts in their consciousness, some little pulls. They want another cigarette, or they want a bit more sugar, or a bit more food. Now, don't misunderstand me. Everyone's got sugar cravings. Not everyone has an entity. Huh? Entities are not everywhere. It's just a small fraction of clients or patients. But those who've got one, those things are incredibly resilient, and they need to be treated with a very special procedure that can't really be improvised.
Now these entities, you break them up in your book. You break them up into a number of different categories, which I found quite interesting, because in our discussion with you, I brought up that it's very closely related to the Kabbalistic view of how these energies work and how they fragment as the soul moves through different dimensions. It sheds different shells of itself in the Kabbalistic terminology. And you relate entities, as opposed to some other people working in this field, as pieces, as shells of people's consciousness who may have moved on. However, they have left certain energy structures behind, because those energy structures couldn't follow them into I guess what you could say is higher dimensional realities, or a heaven reality, or however you want to look at that. You probably put it into words better.
No, I totally agree with your wording. The only point where I might slightly differ is that I don't think my position is extremely original. It's totally standard in India or in Buddhism, for example. In India, if people burn corpses, for example, it was the idea of eliminating as much as possible of energy fragments that people may leave behind. And you'd find that in all traditions, like really just all over the world, you find that somewhat documented in my book, but really all over the world, you had practices that people implemented after the death of a relative in order to make sure that energetic debris would be taken care of. So I really don't think it's an original position at all. I think it's very standard. It runs through a number of traditions.
Then, okay, and how do you view, having not had so much of the traditional movie theatrics experience, have you had any encounters in your work with extremely intelligent, what you would call dark energies, that people may have invited into their life or into their energies?
Not a great deal. You see, the thing to understand is that if you were a dark energy of a dark force of a certain magnitude, you wouldn't be bothered going with the kid and giving them diarrhea or things like that. You'd go straight for the Pentagon or the White House. You'd do things with class. So I think that that's one thing to keep in mind, is that there may be such forces. I don't know. Many religions talk about dark forces, not just Star Wars, and so there are probably things like this. But the danger is that by focusing a little bit too much on those things, one tends to lose sight of a fairly, it's not everywhere, but it's not rare either. A number of people out there are suffering from things as varied from, it could be headaches, it could be menstrual problems, it could be anxiety crisis, it could be all sorts of things, And behind this, there is a little bit of energy at the wrong place. There's a bit of a fragment of energies that should not be there, and that these symptoms are just not going to stop until the cause has been removed, you see. And so that's why I'm trying to keep a very sane and cool-headed debate on this topic, in that sense that, they exist, they're there, and we sort of skew the debate if we take it on the side of big dark forces, kind of thing.
Yeah, and this is the thing. I think you categorize it quite well in your book, Entities, and certainly recommend, if anyone's interested in this and finding out a bit more about it. It's a small book, and it's a very quick read, and it's a very informative read, which you can get to from the website there. But it appears that from your understanding and what you have learnt, that's entities of that caliber are quite rare, and as you say, would be more attracted to I guess stimulants of power, as opposed to Johnny and making him feel ill. But there's still that aspect of shells or fragments that may have come from other people, that may have been embedded or attracted to a certain person, that's resonating in tune with that energy and taking it on board themselves. But it does, the book goes into some detail, and there are processes and methods that one can find a way to deal with them. Is that correct?
Yeah, even though the removal is not something people should attempt. Don't try this at home, kind of thing. It's more a question of being aware that it exists, and that in some cases when people have symptoms that never seem to yield to anything, well, that's one of the things you should consider. Like, for example, a simple example that's quite frequent is that of abortion or termination. When you do a termination, you remove the physical part of the fetus, but you don't remove the energy, the energetic side. The fetus is like, from that point of view, it already has subtle bodies forming. And because there is no energetic procedure that's performed together with the abortion, sometimes those fragments, those shreds, of energy of subtle bodies can stay behind and create all sorts of problems. I remember very well, that's the first client I saw when I arrived in Australia. She was dying, diagnosed with uterus cancer. Like, she was really dying. She was green. They hadn't given us much more time to live. She had an entity in her uterus that came from a termination that she had a few years before. I cleared the entity, and she went from dying to being fine in a matter of days. That was very good for me because I needed clients at the time, and so I suddenly had a lot of clients. I was very lucky. When I first arrived in Australia, I had a string of clients who all had entity-related problems. One of them was a Catholic priest. He was about to be operated for the second time on the cornea, and again, it was not looking good. He was about to lose sight on one eye. And again, we don't want people to form the impression that all physical problems are caused by entities, because it's certainly not like this. It's only a very small fraction that is. But in his case, it was one. I cleared the entity, and certainly he no longer needed any operation, and his sight came back to normal. It was very funny because at the time I was conducting my first trainings in past life therapy in Sydney, and he sent me all these Catholic priests, all these maids, priests and nuns, who were the first people to learn past life therapy with me. And the first person I trained in Australia as an entity clearer was a contemplative nun, one of his friends.
Oh, lovely. Well, it's nice to see them, branching out and looking at alternatives and working in this space. We're on the we've been going for an hour now. I know everyone's we've got try to keep as much as we can to time, and I know there's lots of questions popping out now. As you said, Samuel, as soon as you mention entities, it seems to wake everyone up. So we've got more questions coming in. But what I'd like to do is just let people know that over the next few months, we're certainly going to, myself and Samuel, be talking about how we can further build some bridges between the Lightworkers community and some of these teachings and techniques. It'd be lovely to do this again, and even in a more educational format, Samuel, if you're up for something like that, or having some of your trainers and teachers working with us through this medium, and we can
certainly. I think
we can work towards getting some of this knowledge out.
We live in a world where people who have spiritual interests tend to not work together enough. Schools of spirituality, they're often, sometimes they sue each other, not always, but often they're not that friendly to each other. If there is one thing that's supposed to create unity between people, it's spirituality. And so it's really so desirable to see more links between different spiritual movements, different spiritual people, that they can talk together. Even if they disagree, I'm sure there are things I say or do that are going to shock people who are more into channeling or whatever, but it doesn't matter. It's really important there's a sense of broader unity. We want the light, we want to serve the divine, and that should be something that unites us. And there's not enough of that at the moment. It would be very desirable to see more of it.
Oh, look, absolutely. And look, individual sovereign beings are going to have differences of opinion and different perspectives, and I think that's wonderful. It's the way, in my mind, how creation grows and expands, and at the end of the day, if we are united in that idea of evolution, growth, and freedom, then we should be completely accepting of each other's ideas, just as we expect other people to be accepting of ours. So I'd like to just invite Rick Vader. Are you there, Rick? Can you offer some comments about the workshop that's happening next weekend in Sydney?
Seems that Rick's...
No. Hello. Hello. Yes, I'm there. I'm there.
Rick, do you want to just tell us a bit about the workshop coming up in Sydney?
Maybe it's the volume. I've got to be quite loud. Is that what it is? Okay. It's the introduction weekend.
I wonder if Rick is aware that he's supposed to press the mouse of one of the buttons of his mouse or something like this.
That may be the
Hello.
case.
There we go. I think it's a volume thing. I don't know.
No, you've got it
Anyway,
on. You don't have it on push to talk.
I think
Samuel
what's happening in Sydney is they're having an Awakening the Third Eye weekend, which is a general introduction to the Clairvision work and an opportunity to learn plenty of techniques that you can use in your daily life and to get a sense of the style of work we're working with. We teach people all sorts of things, make sure they know how to dowse their lines. We make sure they've got a method to get started with the third eye. I must say though, one thing, I'm seeing all these fascinating questions coming on the chat. I wish I had time to engage this. They're catching me. I just want to send an apology to all the people who are putting all these beautiful questions. I'd love to be able to engage you there.
Oh, no, look, that's okay, Samuel. That's fine. I think this is a good introductory, and a part of this whole monthly conference is to build up a body of people who are happy to come and use this medium to communicate and share ideas. So, I'd really love to see in the not too distant future specific online workshops that we can dedicate to some of these topics and share some of this knowledge around. I think it'd be wonderful. We've got a global audience here, and we've got access to a global audience, and there are people all over the world who I think this sort of information will really benefit in their growth and evolution.
Perhaps choose a topic, and so I'm feeling terrible. I think I'm letting those people down. There's some really good questions that have come on the chat.
Well, by all means, we can take this offline, and I'll start up or if people want to offer comments on the event itself and ask any questions. Samuel, if you have an account on the website, or if you feel free to make one, it's pretty simple, and you're a pretty net savvy guy, and you can respond over in your own time, or some of the other crew can also respond, and you can also jump onto the forum at clairvision.org as well. Thank you very much for coming, Samuel.
Okay. Yes.
No, go on. Go on. Say what you're going to say.
Yeah. No, I think what's interesting is that we're coming to a period where a lot of people have been doing quite a bit of work, really, and so no matter what system they've started with, they've had some mileage, and they're starting to get out of just beginner's experience and enter works with a much greater depth.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Well,
all right.
Thank you very much. It's been lovely.
Yeah, likewise, Samuel. It was lovely to have you on, and it was lovely to make the connection. And we will certainly keep in touch. If anyone else has some final closing comments, feel free to push your button and give a comment. Try not to all speak at once, but thank you again, and I'm going to close off. I'll keep the recording going for the next few minutes, and I'll post this up in the next week. Also keep in mind the next conference we're going to do will be a conference with a Swami out of India who grew up in the Himalayas in solitude with a teacher who was considered a very rare and divine teacher. He's got some very, very fascinating insights. I've had a few discussions with him, and he's a very, very interesting person to talk to. That'll be the next conference coming up. And by all means, if you enjoyed this, feel free to please make a donation so we can keep the system going. And we look forward to seeing you all again, and look forward to the questions and correspondence that this conference has generated. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Samuel, and thank you for coming.